Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me here, sticking around late on Friday to hang out for another Mograph Mashup. I'm Evan Abrams, and if you're watching this on YouTube, then please join us at Behance.net, where everything is live and I can see who's hanging out. I can see people in the chat. Love to see all the new people. Love to know who you are, where you're from. Oh, we've got Steve, a fellow Canuck, hanging out in New Zealand, which is great. We got Munir here. We got Abdullah, Jack Watson in the house, and of course, you know, we've got Tim holding it down, moderating things. So good to have everyone here. But yeah, let me know who you are. Let me know where you're from, and most importantly, most interesting for me, is what you do in After Effects. And are you animating things? Are you a compositor? After Effects is so many things to so many people, and to me, it is kind of my primary application. I'm in there every day making the motion graphics, making those lower thirds, those titles, and more specifically, I make a lot of explainer videos, which is where people routinely ask me to animate between two subjects for some reason, which happens a lot. So in this series, we've been opening it up and saying, hey, why don't we play a little producer here? We're just going to pick two random things and animate between them. We're going to draw all the assets. We're going to work through all those things. Whoa. Oh, Steve, you're from CFB Petawawa. That's awesome. That's right up the road, not too far from where I am in fabulous Ottawa, Ontario. So join me here in the Behance chat as we go through a little bit of an adventure. To catch you up on what we've been doing, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen a little bit. And what we did last week, if you were hanging out with us last week, we went through a couple of ways that you can animate between two things. And we talked about the general strategies. We talked about technique, we talked about method, and so we animated from a cat to a computer. And this is one of the ways we came up with. We called this the intermediate phase. So if you want to go back and watch that, watch it after this, you catch up on those things. And then another method we used was sort of like a picture-in-picture kind of method, one thing nested inside the other. So those are two options that we have from going from one object to another. And we talked in generalities about what that means, but we also identified a lot of other techniques that we might do. So before we jump into those, I just want to say that there's maybe 5 or 6 general ways we can go from any one thing to any one other thing. If you're doing a lot of explainer video content, if you're doing a lot of interesting GIFs or GIFs, if you're animating a lot of icons, then this kind of thing happens a lot. Especially, you're not always in full control of what the first and last elements are, and you're not always in control of what images you're going between and what they represent. That usually comes down to a script. So we set ourselves a little challenge. We used a little straw poll, and folks decided that this week we need to go from a picture of a mouse to a picture of a globe or planet. I'm kind of playing fast and loose with my interpretation of those things, but we're going to go through the whole process. We're going to go from creating the assets. We are going to animate them. We're going to pick some methods to go through, and I'm going to be asking everybody in the chat to help me out. I need some need some help in the chat, and you can correct me with how you say GIF or GIF as often as you like. I'm gonna keep saying it how I like to say it. Oh man, there's a lot of debate, and the GIF, the peanut butter company. If you enjoy peanut butters, then you might know that there's kind of a peanut butter company that has like a JIF, and they're having fun with it. But yes, Richard, I think we have missed the XD masterclass. I think that was the last thing. But stick around, and we will hopefully make some cool stuff. Diego's asking, what is Mograph? That is motion graphics. So it's the cool short form for that. Motion graphics, motion design, and all of those things. Moving pictures, moving images. But you don't need me to talk about it. We need to actually to do some of it. So let me show you just real briefly where we're starting and where we're going, and we'll see if we can get there. So this week, I've gone ahead and decided to prepare very little. We're actually going to work through all of these challenges live. We're going to work through them, as we do them in line, and hopefully we get to somewhere interesting. So if you need a refresher on what we're talking about. Motion design is basically, we think of it as a subset of animation. Motion design is generally considered the larger umbrella. So we sometimes use traditional animation techniques. We use a lot of keyframing, 2D, 3D, mashing things up. It is really a cross-disciplinary area. So we can do a lot of things. We can touch a lot of techniques, and it's really infinite. The ways we can get from one thing to another. There's not a lot of prescribed ways. In fact, I think the word motion design didn't really exist until very recently. So it's a brand new field. It's wonderful. But if you're thinking of what is motion graphics? Well, if you've ever seen sort of the openings for movies, those kind of title sequences, and even more prevalently these days, the end credits of things. So if you've ever seen your James Bond movies, your Spider-Mans, some of the oldest motion design goes back to a guy named Saul Bass. So definitely check out his work if you want to see some historical stuff, in which he had to do things in an analog way. If he had to go from a mouse, so we'll go from this image to this image, if you had to go from one to the other, you would have had to do all these things manually, either drawing them or creating them and moving them around. We get to do it all digitally using the power of our AfterEffects here. That's the app I'm most comfortable in, but you can also do very similar things in CC Animate. You can keyframe things around in there. We can crack open Cinema 4D Lite, so we might jump into that. So there's so many different applications, so many different ways to go about this stuff. Let's tackle some of them right now. So if you had to put yourself in my shoes, everybody, if you had to animate from this image to this image, I would love to know how you would do it. Right? Always keep that in the back of mind. But if we had to animate, we were charged with animating between mouse and globe. So we want to start by creating assets. And we know that we need to go between these two states, these two objects. So when we're creating these assets, we have to think in reductive terms. That's how I always recommend people do it. If you have full control over creating assets, then this will be very, very helpful for you to consider how much control over a thing you might get. So I'd like to create, hey, Joel, oh man, Joel is back again. You were hanging out earlier on a different live stream, and now Joel is back. I love it. I love people who are keen to hang out for the whole day, which is fantastic. So here, if you have the ability or the freedom to create all these assets yourself, then you're going to get to leverage what we call common geometry. So whenever we're thinking about animating between two things, we really want to consider what we can do that is going to be common between them. So in this case, I've created this mouse out of mostly circular forms, kind of very circular, a lot of circles, a lot of soft edges, because I know in the end what we're going to go towards is something that's entirely made of circles. So if this is where we're going, then we need to help ourselves get there, right? And a big part of this, I like to work in black and white and then I colorize later, but it can be very helpful to enjoy the contrast for demonstration purposes. But if we're able to create the assets ourselves, we can make this a lot easier, because we can think about, all right, we can already kind of see that maybe the body of the mouse, because it's the largest, should form into the large planet. The tail here, we could probably turn that into that orbiting speed line. These things could probably drift off and become the planets in some way, right? So it's it's definitely the sort of thing that you want to kind of plan out. The more you plan, the easier the rest of this stuff is going to be. So if you already have a plan, thinking about what method are we going to use to get from one to the other, it can start to change the way you design the start and end point, right? So hopefully that kind of makes sense. I'm seeing a lot of lively talk about the GIF situation. Can't bring that up without getting heat on the chat, which is fine. Just remember, it's all the same thing. So in here, I've created these ears, and I've chosen that the mouse is going to be in profile. We could have decided we're going to do flat on with the mouse, but in doing a little bit of research, I was trying to think about, how do we draw something we know it's a mouse? How do we know it's a mouse and not a rat? How do we know it's a mouse and not a hamster? What level of detail do we need to provide? What's the fewest number of things that we need to put in there so that the icon reads as mouse? Hopefully, do we have any graphic designers in the chat? Do we have any logo or brand identity people? I would love to hear those folks jumping in. One thing that another designer said to me is that we want to simplify down to what is essential, and once we get there, it's easier to create forms around what is essential. Definitely check out. I would say, let's see. It's called Abstract. Something you want to check out. But yeah, the idea that what is a mouse versus what is a rat, I think is very, very important to think about when you're going to draw this, because if the script says mouse, it has to read as mouse, right? And mice, they typically have smaller bodies relative to their head. They're usually very spherical, and they have large ears relative to their skull size, and a tail that is not that is furry. They have furry tails. So that's kind of the three elements that I wanted to grab onto when I was thinking about this icon, so that we know this is mouse. And so we've got big ears, we've got a tail that's the same color as the body of the mouse. If this were to be a rat, then we would probably want the tail to be much thicker, much longer, and it really requires they're usually connected to a computer. One of the troubles of live streams is that I often really get caught up in here. So yeah, the idea of how we would think this would be a rat. Someone in the chat is saying, and quite nicely, that if it had sort of a long nose, like a longer jaw space, we might think rat, right? Because rats are very triangular. We think rat is triangular, mouse is rounded. Mice are soft. They're soft, cuddly buddies. Not that rats aren't cuddly. I have it on good authority that rats are a lot of fun and very, very, very good pets. So that's how we've decided. That's how we've landed on mouse, right? And so then we want to go to globe or like a planet, right? And so how do we know this is a planet and not just a circle with a bunch of other circles? I think a lot of this is going to come down to the motion of things. How do we make this appear three-dimensional? And I think having things orbit around is going to be very important to conveying that. But yeah, that's kind of how it goes down. Leonardo is definitely right that color is very important. And so when you're thinking about colorizing things, when you're thinking about your color palette, right? If we were to do this in color, we would need to think about, if this was Earth, we know it's usually Earth because it's blue and green. A lot more blue than green, a lot of oceans out there, and maybe some white for the polar regions. And then with a mouse, I guess we could try to do it in blue and green. That might be very difficult, but those are kind of the color cues that can tell us one thing to the other. Primarily because I want to focus on form and shape. I kind of strip the color conversation entirely out of these pieces, just so we can focus on forms only, which is great though. But always remember that color, very important for telling off your story. Is Jerry the Tom and Jerry? Well, Tomcat, Jerry is, I think Jerry's a mouse, Diego, if I remember correctly. Let's continue in this vein. How are we going to get from one to the other? What are some ideas? Well, we talked about before with the cat, sort of a screen in a screen kind of situational. Mice should look cute. Rats should be nasty. There are cute rats. There's cute rats, Joel. You got to give them a chance. So of the methods that we might use to get from one to the other, we talked about intermediate phase. We've talked about a thing within a thing. We can't really do this here, right? I mean, we could If we wanted to do the old zoom in trick, we could zoom into the little mouse's eyeball and then have the planet pop up in there. That's fine, I guess. You know, that doesn't feel great. We could try to have the forms of the mouse kind of bend and twist and 3D rotate so that it seems like the rat is kind of pivoting and becoming the planet. We could do that. But I want to look at a method that we call the explode and combine. So this is the idea that of these forms, all we need to do is put a bunch of objects together that look like they suggest the form suggest the form of a planet, right? That's where we want to go with this. So, back in After Effects, I've brought in the mouse layer, I've brought in the globe layer, but I'm really only going to use these two as my reference. So I'm going to put them kind of in the background, and I am going to bring down their opacity. So I toggle that on by hitting T, and I'm just going to fade them down in the background, right? What I'm actually interested in is converting everything into shape layers. Now, there's many ways you can do that. I personally prefer to use an extension called Overlord that I highly recommend if you're doing a lot of work between Illustrator and After Effects. It's a nice suite of tools for pushing things back and forth. However, I will say there are a lot of ways to kind of move things between these two apps, right? So you can always import, and then you can right click on it, and you can go create shapes from vector layer. Create shapes from vector layer. Ooh, it's time for me to drink some water. Which will give you one layer full of all of the shapes that were in that other layer, right? So that's one way to go about it. Another thing you can do is you can actually copy and paste from one to the other. So I can select this, I can copy. You'll notice that if I start pasting, nothing happens. But if I just take my pen tool, make a couple of clicks out there, then I can select this path, hit paste, and wouldn't you know it, there it is. It's just hanging out right on the timeline. So that's how you can move path information very quickly from one to the other. Another thing I would recommend, though, if you like to go... Diego's asking, how do we switch workspaces and views so fast? So for me, I'm Command-Tab switching between After Effects I got up, and then Illustrator is also open at the same time. Now, if you want to switch between workspaces, you would be using these little buttons up here. However, Window Workspace, you can actually set, if you want to tab between workspaces, which is something I actually do quite a bit, you want to be using like Shift F10, F11, F12 kind of things, but you can set all of this up. You can edit your workspaces. You can put what's on the bar, what's not on the bar. Workspaces and customizing the way you work, I think, is really vital to getting the most out of this application. So it's definitely something that you want to map and figure out for yourself. For example, whenever I'm here on the live stream, you'll notice that I have a window open called Evan. That's the Evan window. It's where I live. But this has been set up so that we can enjoy talking about and showing off some of these tools. Speaking of, we got to do some work. Let's get to work. All right. So how do we get from one to the other? Well, I want to think about doing the big moves first, moving the big objects, making those things go. All right. So how am I going to make this into that? How am I going to make this into a circle? Well, I think we need to start it moving. We talked about explode and combine. So let's think about exploding, and we need to kind of rev up to that. We need to get things moving and then get them breaking, right? So that's kind of the idea. So with this, I might start our journey at 1 second, maybe. That's a good spot, right? So we might go ahead and hit the position here. And if we want this to feel like it's still a mouse, maybe we have it sort of back up and then go forward. I think I want this to go kind of backing up, going forward, looping, and then becoming the planet. Let's try to do that. So let's start here. Let's move back a little bit. Whoa, all these other things are now detached from it. That's weird. So we'll get to that in a moment. I think if we want this to behave like this is all a mouse, then the move here, you know what? We need to create a null. We make a new null object. Let's try to help ourselves out. And I'm going to stick this roughly in kind of the center here. And I'm going to parent the tail, back of your body, ear, eye, everything to the null. All right. Now what I'm doing here is trying to get control of these elements. I know I want them to break apart, but I also know I need them to move together briefly, right? So that's why I'm parenting them to the null. And so this null, we are going to move it back and up a little bit. All right. And I have some keyboard shortcuts mapped up to my mouse here. So I ease things by hitting F9. So we're going to ease it back. And then, what did I say? Let's move forward in a loop, like around. So maybe we loop it down into this area, and then we might loop back up into here. And then we're going to come back to rest around there, maybe. Okay, something to think about. So this acceleration here, this path here, I think that's where everything's going to break apart, right? So that's as much influence as I really need this null to have. Boom. So let's get into the graph editor here and try to deal with some of this stuff. So let's easy ease these. Let's pull this back. And then let's go like this. So what I'm doing here is setting myself up for the break. And the break is going to happen at this highest point of acceleration. This is when everything is going to flake apart. Right? This is when we're going to stop being a mouse and we're going to explode into our constituent parts. It sounds pretty wild, but this is kind of, because the null is what's driving this, this is going to kind of help everything else kind of go. So let me just set up a little bit more of the nuance of this motion, I think. I think we're going to get the rotation in the mix here. So let's have it rotate to get kind of in line, a doop, like this. And then, yeah, this has got to be eased as well. So it's going to come up. Let's see, stagger this, stagger that. And now it's going to drive. It's kind of like a weird car, which is fine. And I'm grabbing my convert vertex tool here, and we're just going to make this kind of a curve like this. All right. And like that. So now I want things to kind of break apart here. This is where stuff is going to break apart. All right. So, whoop, poo. So this is the point of maximum acceleration, and this is where everything comes apart. We're going to come around the curve and we can start leaving the space. So the body, we can grab our position here. We know where we want this to end up, right? We want it to end up roughly here. I think that'll probably be fine. That's not the direction we want it to go at all, though. That's not how we do. What we want to do is, again, grab our convert vertex tool, and let's line up these keyframes so that one is kind of taking over as soon as the other one is done. And we can just drag these handles out. All right. So let's see. How do we feel about this? It feels all right. I feel like it still needs to ease into the end. Like that. Yeah, that's fine. And at the same time, as I broke its nose, I smashed this thing right apart. What I want to do is have this path here. I would like it to start conforming to be more circular, I think. So this is where we want to call up our UU on here. We want to grab this path and grab these keyframes, and we can really just animate the keyframes, or these, frames, these points, if you will. We need to fill in this semicircle part here. So what we can do is like this and like so. If you want, if you want. There's no rules about it. It's fine. Now, if you want this to be perfect, right? You want this to be absolutely perfect. And you want this to be perfectly circular, right? Because it's got to become circular, right? It's got to be perfect. What we can do is we can kind of play with this a little bit. So we know that its position is going to kind of come in and ease a little bit on the end. So I think that it needs to be resolved into being a circle at yeah, it's got to be resolved by let's grab the position. Let's grab this. So let's squeeze the position a little bit. Not feeling that yet. We'll get there. Whoop. Like that. Okay. So at this point, this is where we can hide some of our mistakes, hide some of our crimes, right? And what we want to do is then make sure that our path is kind of resolving towards that point, and we want it to be eased so that that's where we're going to hide the change, right? So here, what's going to happen instead is this layer will now be taken over by another layer. That's right. That's right. One layer ends, one layer begins. So I'm going to make an ellipse, and I'm going to dial down the ellipse and make it exactly the same size as the earth that we want there. That's pretty good. And this earth, where's the body? Here we go. Call this earth. We could call it planetoid. I'm going to make both of these orange just so I know that they go with each other. This goes with that because they're the same tone here. Burp. And they're going to come together like that. Okay. So that's kind of where this layer needs to begin. Parent one to the other. Yeah. Boop. And now we can do something like a little scaling. So we can kind of scale this down to where they're exactly the same size here. And then we can just scale that up. Boop. Actually, you know what? I'm going to keep it going down. Check this out. All right. See how we feel about this. Is that helpful? Maybe. So it's going to come down and then get too big and then come to rest. You're going to find that there's a lot of playing with stuff. All right. So there we go. How do we feel about this body? All right. So that's becoming a planet. Nice. So with this kind of situation, that layer is over. Yeah, one layer is dead. Long live the other layer. One layer comes to town, one layer leaves town. There are only 3 forms of stories, etc. Oh, and we've already taken up half an hour. How have we done it? Oh. So we need to deal with the rest of these little things. So the ear is very important, I think. So, oh man, it's really hard to see my keyboard through the microphone sometimes. But the ears, I like this idea that, look, I find rodents very charming personally. I think they have a lot of really interesting characteristics. I think they get a bad rap. I grew up in the country, so my relationship to animals is maybe a little bit different than other people. But you know, I like a little ear twitch, you know. Beep. Beep. So I like a little tell that goes on so that you know something's about to happen. So let's see. Maybe when we pull back, this little ratatouille boy is gonna pull his ear back. Boom! Oh man, it really feels like a bowling ball here. Is it mouses? Gabrielle, is it mouses? Is it meese? Is it just mouse? Is mouse the plural of mouse? So this comes down. This is kind of the bowling ball moment when things bounce around. So here, let's call up the position. I'm going to call up the anchor point as well. only because I do want the anchor point to kind of return to the middle center of this layer a little bit. So boom. And this thing kind of has to go in a different arc because it's going to have to arc around and then come up here like this. Okay. Let me smooth these out. Again, I'm using my Convert Vertex tool to try to smooth my... Oh, oui, souris. That's the name I wanted. Of course, it's that easy. So let's see. Yeah, so it's going to come up here. This is when I think we can reset that anchor point into a kind of middle center alignment. So anywhere you can hide these kinds of changes. So you notice I'm shifting the anchor point around, right? And this kind of shift would be noticeable if it happened at the same time as other elements are going on. But thankfully, we're able to cover that up a little bit by playing around with timing. We're able to make it just kind of happen. It's just happening on the way, right? And it doesn't feel like it's as jarring, so we get a little bit of control over that stuff. Something else I'm going to recommend you do, take these little middle keyframes here, and we're going to right-click. We are going to rove them across time. Now, recently on Twitter, there was a great little explanation by Mamo World about what roved keyframes are, what roving keyframes are. And basically what they are is a keyframe that has value information, but it isn't locked in time. In fact, it's going to be controlled by these other two. So notice how they kind of move around as I change this from linear to eased, because they ride the line. All right. They are going to be pushed around on the line. So that's pretty great. Wonderful. The other thing that's, I think, important to remember here is that we need to get the layer orders of things right. So here we go. Boom. Nice. So that's coming into where we want, kind of. Where do I have to line it up with? It has to line up with... Ooh, that's not going to do it. There. It's got to go right there. All right. So I need this to... here it is. So this ear, the ear/moon. So the final resting state of its position is going to be around here. Let me call up its scale because the final scale needs to be somewhere as well. I think it should scale down before it arrives, but I can go to the end here and scale us into position. Nice, kind of like that. Now I do honestly like that sometimes this follows its motion path, right? The ear should be leaving smeared lines. That's right. Don't worry, we're gonna smear it. We're gonna smear this bad boy. It's gonna happen. So let me just go ahead though and get these little bits knocked out. There we go. So that's coming into position like that. One thing I want to do is round off that point, right? That point's got to go. It's got to go. Another thing that I don't necessarily like is that from here, here, this needs to be rotated around to be more like that. I like the idea that it's kind of going crazy through space. Like this, maybe. Yeah, this feels right. Boo! Oh man, I'm tumbling around space. It's crazy. But once this resolves into a circle, we won't really notice, right? Now, how can we do that? How can we round off this point? Well, we could, again, go back and we could manipulate the path, but thankfully we can add a rounded corners to this. So we're just adding this into the group. And as we round off that corner, perfectly done. We nailed it. So we're going to go from here, zoom, like that. So that's as rounded as it needs to get. And it starts at 0, of course. So So it rounds off as it comes around the corner. So if you need to cut off or round edges or make things a little bit squishier, use rounded corners. It'll help you out. Boom. So how are we feeling so far? Okay. Coming around. I know I shouldn't make cat noises because, you know, it's a mouse. There was talk of smears. Love that. So Joel, smears. How are we going to make these smears? There are many ways. I like an effects-driven approach myself. You can always use a non-effects-driven solution if you wish. But personally, I think an effects-based approach is nice. Nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up my old buddy, the Echo, and drop the Echo on here. Now, what Echo is doing, the Echo is just taking this layer and copying it a few times. So if you have a look here, we're basically adding, we're using the operator of add. I actually like composite in front or composite in back. Because we're doing things flat and because there's no texture on here, we're going to get to hide a lot of our badness. Increase the number of these bad boys on here. And then, this is the really important part, we are going to tighten this up. All right. Notice that we're even getting like so minute. Right. And this is going to give us our trail. So don't worry about the echo in time giving you the trail. Worry about the number of echoes giving you the trail. Right. So sometimes that can be helpful. Something else to consider is this idea of decay. I don't know, how deep do people want to get into this kind of methodology? Because there's some really interesting stuff that we can do with that. Yeah, let's keep going. Let's keep it going on this. I am going to... what can we do to this? What can we do? We need to use... I like the Gaussian blur or Gaussian blur. This is another pronunciation problem. But because it's GPU accelerated, I do enjoy it like this. You're probably saying, Evan, you're making everything blurry. How dare you? Well, that's okay. We can use a number of choking, like matte chokers and all that stuff to make this stuff kind of work, right? And what we can do here is... we want to clamp these values down, right? Because we kind of want like a clean style here. So we can even just use something like the simple choker on this. Oh no, that's not it, because where am I falling down on this bad boy? There we go. Now we're choking it down like this. That's fine. But ultimately, there are a lot of things that can hone this in. Gauss rhymes with house. Okay, so it's Gaussian? Be a Gaussian blur? Gauss rhymes with house. Well, here we are in the house mouse Gauss sauce. So I don't know. I'm not really loving that. I want to use, instead of using the echo method, I'm shifting gears a lot here, I know, but we can always simply use some lines to try to gussy this up a little bit later. So if we are happy with how this looks, let's see, am I happy with how this looks? Sure. I'm going to call open the position here, and I'm going to look at the graph editor, and the points where this thing is going super fast are this right here. This is the arc in which we are going the fastest, really. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take my pen tool and make sure I have nothing selected, and I'm just going to draw a line up here. One nice line. Yeah, a stroke. Yeah, definitely. That's the idea, that we're going to take this. We're just going to take the fill, make it go away. We are going to do. I like that my color picker shows up in the other monitor. So go ahead and make sure that this is the same. We're just going to fatten this up. Yum, yum, yum. Like that. And we want this to kind of conform along this this path, right? Which is cool. You can do it visually. You can just copy. You can try to copy paste these values out. I kind of prefer to do it visually, just because I'm not totally sure I want this to be mathematically precise. Oh, mousy and blur. Gabrielle, if we had achievements on this live stream, you would get one. We need to work out an achievement system. Anytime someone drops a heaping pun like that, that's what we want to be rewarding. So we want to set this to be kind of rounded caps, and we are going to add in here a trim paths onto this. And now the trim paths, we are going to be messing with kind of the start and end of it a little bit. And now we can, here we go. So this seems like a perfectly nice spot for this to be. Oh, I've got it backwards, I think, like this. Yeah, there we go. Kind of like here. All right. So if we move back in time, might be like this. So we'll just, push this back, push this back. You may even have to tweak your path as it goes. Totally fine. Oh yeah, because we have the thing rotating. I was like, why is this not sitting well? Why is this not feeling great? Well, because this thing is tumbling through space. That's why. Because we're crazy. But we end up with this. Now, you might say, Evan, when I stop that frame, that looks silly. Oh yeah? Well, do you even notice it, right? So, we don't really notice a lot of when things don't connect as we might expect them. In fact, you'd be surprised at how little of the world people really observe with a fine-tooth comb, especially these types of things. So go ahead, play around, have a good time with it, because a lot of this stuff is deeply... Oh, that kind of hangs. Oh, yeah, that feels good. So with that little streak, that's a fun hang time. That feels like a nice slap. I like it. Okay. We need to deal with the rest of these objects. When we're doing these explode things, the explode and recombine, some elements can just go away, right? Some elements don't need to hang out. They don't need to be here. This one's got to go. It's got to go. It doesn't have any place in our final composition, so it has to disappear. Whenever there's magic, someone's got to disappear. So again, let's start it off here, and we kind of lose it a little bit, but it is darker than the rest of the space. So let's see. Let's see if it just lags behind. How do we feel about that? That's kind of funny. Yeah, it just kind of flies off a little bit, maybe like this. So it's kind of going in the opposite direction like that. And one of the things that's important when things are leaving, try to have them leave at maximum velocity. And if we want people to pay attention to the fact that they're leaving, you'll probably want to make them a little bit bigger just before they go. And let's see how we feel about that. So what's kind of fun about that is it's going to call a little bit of attention into the center of the frame, which is where the action is going. So it's really just throwing us for a loop, bringing our eye back in that direction. Should this even just go a little bit longer? Yeah, I'm feeling that. Boom. All right. Cool. Let's return. Okay. So that's the story of the eye. What can we do with the tail? Tail. I kind of feel like folding it up early. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag it right here, and we are going to rotate it a little bit. So it's going to over-rotate when this thing gives it some juice. Then it's going to come back. But don't worry, we're not going to see it for that long because we are going to trim this path away. So we're just going to add a trim paths in here. Yep. And away it goes. We don't even notice it. We don't even notice it. It feels so natural. Oh, so natural. Now we just have one more element to deal with. Is this? It's the back ear. Oh, back ear. What are we going to do with you? How are we going to turn this back ear into all these weird globules out here? How are we going to do that? Something else to consider if we want to make this trail. You know, maybe we can make that happen. But ear. What are we going to do with you? That's coming up this way. That's coming up that way. I think it needs to continue along with everybody, right? And let's see. Oh, we only got 15 minutes, so we better work fast. Okay. So let's have it come up. Spiral. Spiral in. Okay. So again, we're going to rove these. Another way to deal with our keyframes, and I must mention these things, is you can go in here to toggle what we want to do with the keyframe interpolation right here, right? And what we want to do is have some fun with this where we're going to deal with the spatial interpolation, and we could crank it onto Bezier perhaps. We could crank this onto... So just real quick, this is what happens when you choose Bezier. You see we get these handles, which is nice. We try continuous Bezier. That's pretty much the same. We could go auto Bezier, which is actually a little bit of fun. But for us, yeah, we just need the handles so we can start playing around with it. Ah. Again, we can always just use our convert vertex tool to play around with that. So, what I actually want to do I want to play a little bit around with scaling here. So I'm going to grab the scale of this thing. I'm going to push it so it seems like it's going further into the background. I'm going to rove these. Again, I love my roved keyframes. I just love them. And what I want is for this thing, actually this one is the pause. So it's going to pause up front here before it fires back in, right? So this is the idea that this guy's lagging. It's going to lag a bit behind while this guy goes ahead. Then it's going to fire through, and then it's going to kind of explode. It's going to kind of hit, and then these are going to fragment. So that's the idea. I'm going to try to bounce this thing off the hull, basically. So what I want to do is bring this down, bring this up. So at this point, this layer should actually be scaled up quite big, like that. And in order for that to feel right, I think it has to get small back here. So it's like I'm going to drift into the background a little bit. So that doesn't feel quite right. Maybe because it's getting too big too soon. Is that what it is? Yeah, it's okay. Here we go. So it's coming up to meet us, and then it's going to get very, very tiny. Perfect. Feeling that. Oh boy, run out of time. Again, we're going to do that same thing where we use the rounded corners. If you're coming in late, the rounded corners trick is how we can kind of make this little guy's corner go away. Oh, I don't like that they overlap. Oh, that doesn't feel good. That feels bad. Let me just grab those positions. We gotta go. We gotta duck this guy. Let's spiral him in tighter. Like that. Yeah. Yeah. Andy says, it feels like it's pausing too long. Yeah, probably. I don't know. Too long? Not long enough? Tough to say for me. I think one of my trubs is that it feels like it's expanding like a balloon, which is not what I would like, you know. I don't know. I think it's just getting too big. I think that's one of my problems with this. Oh, that's even worse. Okay, well. It's flying right at us. Maybe we just have it like this. Yeah, I think these two have to line up with each other. Because that's the motion, right? It's coming at us, and then it's going away. Hey, what's up? Shoom. But, so, I don't like that it pauses, right? And in fact, if we want this to not pause at all, we have to get this off of the line. So when I say off the line, I mean it can't touch a 0. So it's good to lock these things together, make them continuous. Sorry, skip past that really quick. So keyframe velocity, when you double click on a keyframe on your graph editor, it's going to bring in the incoming and outgoing. And you can link them together. And if you link them together, when you start adjusting them up, you get this interesting thing that happens that it never stops, right? It never comes to a rest completely, which is exactly what we want. So if something you're like, I don't want it to just sit there, well, just get this up off the floor, basically. If you're more comfortable with the value graph, you really need to smooth out that. So that's the idea, that you're smoothing that stuff out. I believe I was attempting to round this off, like that. I feel like that rounding needs to have taken place before we are presented with the object. I want this to have the same. Boom. And then we could have this thing just explode in a bunch of little circles. As we say, someone comes to town, someone leaves town. There's only 3 kinds of stories. Or isn't it? There's only 1 kind of story? I don't know. Someone let me know what that quote is. So at this point, all of these circles are going to explode out, right? I'm feeling a little bit lazy. I'm just going to duplicate this. I am going to create shapes from this vector layer. Cool. I'm going to solo it. We are going to look at it only. We're going to crank this up. I'm going to delete everything that I don't want. Delete, delete, delete. Now what's fun here is if you call up the position of all these things, we should be able to stick them all in the middle quite succinctly. So I'm just going to set position, 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 position. Like that. Don't need to solo that anymore. This thing comes in for a crash. So that's when we need all these things to have the same position, which will be this. Copy and paste and paste and paste and paste. And then we just need to mess with these frames. Editing that speed graph. There we go. All right. All right. Let's have a look at our monstrosity here. What's this? What's this guy? Oh, that's nothing. We don't need this to be anything until this point. Let's try that out. Not terrible, right? Are these the same color as the ear? I don't know if they are. Maybe they... No, I think they're the same color as the planet. Okay, let's try that. All right, that feels better. Now I think I might actually tuck this behind. So it's like it explodes at the back. There we go. I kind of don't like that this is snoozing. So one fun thing. Oh boy, guys, we've run out of time. I'm so sorry. Hold on. I want to thank everybody for coming out. We've hit our time limit, so I need to shut it down. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for hanging out. Stick around on behance.net/live. Come back next week, starting Monday. There's a lot more great things to do. A lot of creative challenges. I want to thank you all for being active in the chat. I love seeing everybody who comes out, and I hope I see you all again. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks again, and bye for now.